Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rob McDonald, Business Process Services Marketing Manager at Ricoh Canada. Thanks for joining us over your lunch hour. Let's get started. I'd like to thank you all for joining today's special webinar, How to Get Started in Records Management, a workshop for Alberta municipalities. Before I hand proceedings over to our presenters for today's session, I have a few housekeeping details just to cover. First, this webinar will be recorded and shared with all registrants after today's presentation. Next, all participants have been placed into listen-only mode, but we'd love to hear from you during the session. So if you have a question for our presenters at any time, please feel free to type it into the chat window, which is located in the bottom left corner of your screen. We will be answering questions at the end of the session. However, if we don't get to your question during today's webinar, we'll be sure to follow up with a reply via email afterward. So without further delay, I'd like to get things going and welcome John Eustachio, or Duke as he's known to us. Duke, over to you.
Thank you, Robert. So today we'll begin with a discussion on information governance and digital transformation, and how this relates to records information management. Then we'll look at the building blocks of what makes a records information management program successful. And then we also know that at the center of a records management program is your records classification and retention schedule. Now, if this hasn't yet been established, how do we move forward? So we'll look into that one as well. And then we will look at how this may be implemented in a EDRMS. Right? And then towards the end, we will share with you and how Ricoh can help you get started. And we'll end with a Q&A. So information governance. So the Association of Records Managers and Administrators have defined information governance as a strategic cross-disciplinary framework. So it's a disciplinary framework for managing your information assets. So this one, it's the information across your whole organization. So it's not just the information in finance, it's not just the information in public works or engineering, it's everything. And the reason it's strategic is because information is growing at an exponential rate, right? And, you know, there needs to be a way to manage all of this information as it grows and as our organization evolves. Now, the bulk of your information assets are actually records. So the records of business, right? So we'll look into the records management piece, because if you actually look at records management, you might say that records management is the practical application of your information governance. So we ask ourselves, how do we manage our paper records? How do we manage our electronic records? And also personal information. Now, with personal information, there's guidance, right? We have the Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act, the PIPEDA, and Alberta's Personal Information Protection Act, which provides guidance on how we manage personal information. But not all our information is personal information. So what about the rest of the information, the rest of the different types of information? How do we manage that? So we look at records management. Right? So we need to find out first, define what is a record. So we look at the ISO definition of a record. So it's information created, received, maintained as evidence and as an asset by an organization or person in pursuit of legal obligations or in the transaction of business. So keywords here is evidence, legal obligations, and the transaction of business. So in our experience, defining or identifying what is a record within the organization is a challenge for all users. So because we're always in records management, we're taught to we have to make sure that we keep the proper record. So what then is a record, right? So key words here is transaction of business. So any information that provides evidence of a transaction within the organization is a record of business. And you want to keep that because of your legal obligations, right? So now when we're talking about keeping a record, there are two types of records. So we know that there are transitory records. So these are records that are short-lived. And an example would be draft documents, or sometimes known as working documents. So when their value has outlived its purpose, you can actually delete these transitory records. So they don't really get into your records classification or your records management program. They just get deleted. And the other type of record is a record in its final form. So what is this record in its final form? So these are documents that are basically no longer edited, right? For example, you receive an invoice. That invoice that you receive is already a record in its final form, right, from your supplier, for example. So you don't edit that anymore. You send out an email. So the moment you hit that send button, that's a final record, right? But notice it has to be, the subject has to be part of the transaction of business. So if you have that email with, let's say, your colleague asking each other, oh, where are we going to have lunch? That email is not a record of business, so you don't need to keep that. You can delete that. Right? So important here is you keep those records, again, because of your legal obligations. So you want to keep those records just in case you are brought to court and you need to prove a business transaction. And that's why you keep those records. Now, in the paper world, it's easy. You have the original document. And that's why we keep these files and paper documents. You file them into a folder, put them in a filing cabinet. However, in the digital world, how are the original documents identified, managed, and secured to qualify as documentary evidence? How do we do that? So we look at information governance for the answer. So the goal of your information governance program is to balance the cost of managing your information on one hand with the risks of not managing it properly and the opportunities that you can gain for managing it properly on the other hand. So you have your cost and you have your benefits and your risks. Now, the cost, the investment on that is actually in two areas, right? So the management tools, because again, information is exploding. We can't do it manually. We need management tools to be able to manage that, and we turn to technology for that. And this means there has to be some form of digital transformation from how we're doing it in the past in the paper world to the electronic world. So that digital transformation has to take place. And then the other part of the investment is the human resources side, the people part. Because the tools will not work for you if you don't have anyone actually implementing it, right? Implementing it, and as well as ensuring that you have compliance. You need those two. So we'll look at digital transformation. So you'll hear these buzzwords. You'll hear digitization. You'll hear digitalization, and you'll hear digital transformation. So in records management, the digitization part is really scanning your paper documents and converting it into the electronic format. So that's the digitization part, right? And then we move towards the digitalization. Now we're looking at the processes, the manual processes that produce these paper documents, and we are looking at automating those processes. Because the idea here, the goal is we don't want to keep producing paper documents, right? So when we get to digital transformation, it's really the transformation of your business. So it's a business transformation. It's how you now deal with and move your business forward in the digital world. So when we're looking at digital transformation, we have all of this information, all of these documents, all of these electronic files that we have in our organization. So it's now the strategy to take that information and just stuff it in a repository. Would that be our strategy? Actually, that's what we don't want. Right? So this implies that when you move, when you have you're going through your digital transformation journey, there is a certain amount of cleanup that needs to take place. Right? So when you're going from paper to electronic, you need to do some sort of cleanup, because garbage in is garbage out. If we just take what we have today and just stuff it into a bigger drive, for example, we still have the same problem. So digital transformation. So here is a 5-step phase, essentially illustrating what digital transformation is. So in the first two, you'll notice in the first two phases, it really talks about paper to electronic. So we digitize our documents, and then we have to organize it. So organizing here basically means we need to classify them and group them properly. Right? And the third phase here is we automate the process. So we try now to move away from a paper-based process to an electronic-based process. And the reason you want to do that, as I mentioned earlier, is to get away from producing paper. Because a paper process will, at the end of the paper process, you still have paper. So as you automate that, you want to start getting away from that. Then you streamline the processes, and then you transform the processes. So once the processes are in their electronic format, you can now take advantage, for example, of, let's say, robotic process automation, right, to do the mundane tasks of your process. Or you can even use AI. So that's already in phase 5 here. But you'll notice that the digital transformation process is really a cyclical process, right? Because your organization is growing, your organization is evolving. We're adapting to the growth of the community. So it's a cyclical process. It's a continuous process. Right? We gotta reevaluate, and then we go back to reorganizing our content, and we keep moving forward. So here we have some digital transformation tips. So when we talk about digital transformation here, we're again talking about we have our paper world, our documents, our records in paper, and we're moving that towards the electronic world. So the first tip here is we organize our paper documents and electronic files with records management in mind. And we'll talk a little bit more about this in the coming slides, right? Then we also want to avoid reinventing the wheel. And we'll see this later as well, what I mean by reinventing the wheel. And then in your digital transformation journey, you need a records management champion. And that records management champion has to have the authority. So what I mean by that is it's going to be a very big challenge if, let's say, the records management responsibilities are just tagged on to an existing individual with an existing job, and it's just a add-on to the person's job. And the reason for that is because the person will lose focus, right? And then also here, what's important and what I've seen that is left out a lot is the training program. End users, the community, the user community, they need to be trained on your whole records management information program. And this is a continuous training. It's not a one-time thing. And then now, since we're moving towards the digital world, you need a technology solution partner to help you move forward, right? Because you can't do this alone. Because the solutions partner actually has the best practices, and they can share that with you. Okay, so let's look at the building blocks of what makes a records management program successful. So first here is your information governance strategy. So this is the holistic approach to managing your information, right? And then below that is actually you need a bylaw. So this is very important. So the bylaw now here defines, right, your records information management program. It will define that. It will define the responsibilities, who's responsible for that program, right? And so you need that so that the team who's going to run your program will have the authority, right, to enforce the program. I've seen a lot of organizations wherein they have, again, ad hoc responsibilities to the program and nobody's following it because you don't have a stick, right? You don't have a stick to move the program forward, and you need that. So the program as well will have to have as I mentioned, you're at the center of that program is your records classification and retention schedule. And then you also have to have your guidelines and procedures. So these are the guidelines and procedures on how you're managing your records. A simple example would be, let's say, a file naming convention, for example. So you have to have a file naming convention. So your user community will have to understand how certain files are named, right? Another example is, for example, if you're moving towards the digital world, is your scanning policy. You will not be able to get rid of your paper documents or receiving paper documents from constituents or from the citizenry, but you don't want to handle those paper documents. What you want to do is that you want to transform them into digital format and when do you do that? You do that at the earliest possible time, for example, right? So in other words, if somebody comes to your office in the front desk and submits a piece of paper, what you want to do is scan it at the point of receipt. So what's your scanning strategy with that? So you have to have that as well, right, in your records management program. So below that is you have your physical records. So you have your records management program, the records classification, their filed records are classified based on that. You have your legacy documents, you have your historical, and you have your heritage documents. And under that, you have your system of tracking, because you will have all of these boxes in different locations. You may have it on site, you may have it off site. So you need a way to track this information. So when you need them, you can find them, right? On the electronic side, the electronic records, there are basically two types of electronic records, right? So you have electronic documents. So these are your digital images. So these are basically your files. Right now, your files in your hard drives, in your shared drives, right? And then the other type of electronic record is actually your electronic data. So this is the data points that are sitting in your bigger systems, like your financial information. So your financial system holds the record, the data of all your financial transactions. Another example is let's say if you have an HRIS system, that system actually holds the entitlement of the vacation entitlement, for example. Like if I'm entitled to, let's say, 15 days of vacation this year, that 15-day number is stored somewhere in the system. So that's a data point, right? Now, for electronic documents, you have systems that manage electronic documents. So that's our EDRMS, Electronic Document Records Management System, and it's also known as Electronic Content Management System, right? So that system is designed to manage electronic documents. Okay? So you also have other systems like you have your Windows Drive, you have your shared drive, you have your OneDrive, right? And for electronic data rather, you have your bigger systems that I mentioned. You have your accounting systems, you have your property systems, you have your GIS systems right now. That holds all the data on that. Now, it's important to understand the distinction because we want to make sure that we're not using one system for a different purpose, right? So if you have an EDRMS, we need to understand that the EDRMS is a tool to manage our files, our electronic files, right? And of course, under here is the IT infrastructure that enables all of this. Now, as I mentioned, what's important here is training and communication. You cannot have your program you cannot have your records information management program without a training program that comes with it. And this is constant training. And on the other side, you need an audit and compliance activity as well. So the records management team will actually go through that as well. And the reason why you need to do that is because you want to know if your records management program is working and what adjustments that you need to do. So in a RIM practice, let's look at the checklist. So these are checklists on the RIM practice that are important to have to make sure that so that your probability of successfully implementing your RIM practice is high, right? So the first, as I mentioned, is bylaw. You need the bylaw. This gives the RIM program the authority to implement the program. Secondly, you would need a records coordinator. So this is a focused resource. I know it's difficult at times to have this, but if you want the program to succeed, you have to have a focused resource. Then at the center, as I mentioned, is your records classification and retention schedule. Now, and later on, we'll look at this, right? So why is this needed? It's because this is actually used to organize your documents and records. And when we look at it later, you'll see that we're going to be talking about how records are actually grouped together and how we can take advantage of that. Okay. Next, you have to have your guidance, your guidelines and procedures, because this will be you'll reference this when you're doing your training program in your audit. You have your training program as well. And then since, again, information exploding, you need to have technology to help you manage your information. For on the records management side, it's the electronic document records and management system. That's your technology solution. And you need a trusted partner to help you implement that, provide guidance, and provide best practices. So you'll notice here in the digital transformation, so we go back to this diagram, it's organizing the content, right? So that's where it basically begins when you have your program, you start it, it's okay, so how do I now organize the content? So let's talk a little bit more about it. So tips for organizing our content. So we organize our documents and files based on a records classification system, so your RCRS. So that we talked a little bit about that earlier, right? And the reason for that is because the records classification system has primary and secondary subject headings that we can use to group our files together. Because that's what records management managers do, right? So we can do the same, right? And also equally important when you're organizing your content is we need to identify the document types. So the document types are not the file types like it's PDF or it's TIFF or it's a Word document. No, the document types we're talking about here is that this piece of paper is an invoice. This piece of paper is an agreement. So these are the different document types. And the reason why you want to do that is because that's part of classifying the document. And later on, if we do this right, we will be able to find our documents. So this is also what we call the metadata that we need to attach to these documents. Now, in the records classification, here in British Columbia, there is the Local Government Management Association. So the LGMA, they have developed their own records classification system, adopted by a lot of the local governments here. In Ontario, you have the TOMREM. So it's the Ontario Municipal Records Management System, again, adopted by a lot of local governments in Ontario. Now, in Alberta, it's a big question here. Does Alberta have one, right? So in my research, I saw that the Municipal Affairs Office of the provincial government actually created this retention and scheduling of municipal records, and this was done in 2014. I don't know if there's an update. Maybe there's an update. But we'll look at this as well and compare this with the others. So we need a records classification so we can use this now to start grouping our files together. Okay, so let's look at a comparison here. Let's look at LGMA, and here I'm looking at the Alberta government. So this is your provincial government. So the provincial government has their administrative records and disposition authority. So this is their classification. And here for BC, we'll look at the LGMA records. So just a quick comparison. So you'll notice here, on the left is LGMA, on the right is the RDUP, or from the Alberta government. And you'll notice that you have sections, so they both have sections. They both have a numbering system, so that's like your serial number for the different record series that are under these sections. So you might want to call these sections as primary sections or primary subject matter headings as well. Okay. And if we go below one section, like this is the administration section, you'll notice similarities as well, right? You have administration general, and you have the rest of the different subject matter headings that are related to administration. But you'll notice here on the right, since this is for provincial government, it's a little bit different, right, than the one that's you see on the left, which is really designed for local government. So you'll notice, like in the local government side here on LGMA, a lot of these are what we can use today to classify records. Right? Now let's look at TOMRMS. Let's compare TOMRMS. So TOMRMS is a little bit different. The way they design TOMRMS is a little bit different. So they made it a little bit more intuitive on the numbering scheme. So when you look at the administration primary heading for the administration, when you look at the secondary headings, they usually begin with the first letter of the section heading. So here it's A001, knowing that, so A here, we know that it is for administration. But it basically serves the same purpose, right? But even the way it's organized, you'll notice here in the TOMRMS, you have a section called administration, then the second section down here is council and bylaws, whereas in the LGMA, councils is part of the administration section. But for the purposes of organizing files, that's still okay, right? For as long as the subject matter is actually identified and defined. Because if it is identified and defined, then we can use it. Okay? And that's what we want. We want that because that's how we're going to group our files. So if we look at the municipal affairs, the retention and scheduling of municipal records. So here you'll notice it's a little bit less busy in terms of the subject matter. Is again, you have the subject matter, you have the description, and then you have the retention. Now this is still okay. We can still use this again because what's important here is that the subject is actually identified, right, and defined. So we can use this as to group our files. Now, the retention period here, the retention schedule, since we're looking at just grouping our files, we don't want to focus on the retention period yet, right? So in other words, if we look at LGMA, if we want to look at LGMA, we want to look at the subject matter headings, we don't have to worry about the retention at this point because we're just looking at grouping our files. So we can do that later on. Now let's look at how actually can we take these subject matter headings and implement it on an EDRMS, right? So how will this look when we start organizing our files in a electronic document and records management system? So an example would be like this. So on the left, so we're using LGMA here as our example to organize our files. So on the left here now, you'll see Workspace. So Workspace here is really intended for end-user facing folder structure. So departments, basically. So here, in this example, you'll see that, let's say, corporate services is using these records series or these sections in the course of their daily business, right? So when they're doing their daily business, the records that they're handling would fall under administration, would fall under buildings, information systems, legislative services, and protected services. So in this example, that's what corporate services, those are the documents that corporate services handle. And you'll see the same thing in finance. So the way it's organized, it's by department. And in some organizations, in some municipalities, they find it, they like it this way so that, because it's now focused just on the particular department. Right? Now, on the right side here is record space. So record space is basically really intended for the view of the records manager. Right? So here, the records manager, you'll notice here there's no division of, or it's not sectioned by department, right? It's really just the whole records classification system, because that's how records managers really view or manage their records. It doesn't matter whether it's coming from one department and another department, it just goes under administration, right? So this is basically how it looks. Now, on the TOMRIN side, it's very similar. So record space, you have, again, your subject matter heading there, AM asset management, and then you have the record series is below. The AM01 tracking, that's already the record series, and this is how you organize it with using TOMRINs. Okay. So going back to organizing your content. So we want to organize it using an existing records classification system. So to give you another example, the First Nations actually here in BC, they've actually taken the LGMA, and what they've done is that they've taken the LGMA and then they localize it, they customize it for First Nation use. Right? So now when you look at LGMA and you compare it to what the First Nation has, it's very, very similar. The numbering scheme is very similar, but there are subject matter headings in the First Nations version that does not appear in LGMA. For example, forestry, for example, it doesn't appear in LGMA. But everything else is similar. So now they have this information management toolkit that is available to different First Nations to use as a basis for managing the records. So you could do the same thing, right? So we use a records management classification system to start grouping our files, and this now makes us records management ready, because later on, what needs to be done later on, when you actually have it, like for example, you have the retention schedules when you're still developing that, right? So when you have decided on what the retention schedules will be, you just plug them into the different record series of your classification. And then you have it completed, right? So we focus on the primary and secondary subject headings to group our files. So we want to group them using the headings of the records classification system. Okay. We identify our document types, very important. These are the metadata that we're going to associate with the different files that we have, so we can find it later on. And here, we cannot just take LGMA as is and then implement it in Alberta, because it doesn't work that way. You may have different retention schedules, right? That by legislation that applies to Alberta but doesn't apply to British Columbia, and vice versa. And so, and the same thing with the TOMRINs. Right? So you can't just, port it directly. There's a lot of research that needs to take place. You got to cite a lot of legislations and regulations regarding the actual retention schedule, right? So the components of a successful RIM program, when you're trying to develop your RIM program. So you need your bylaw. Okay, that you can do. You can develop your bylaw, have it approved, make it go to council. Then you need that records coordinator to actually implement your program. You need your records classification. Not as today, not as important is your retention schedule. That is definitely, of course, important. But in terms of organizing your files, the classification itself will suffice, and then you can port the retention schedule to that later on. You need to have your guidance and procedures, policies as well, scanning policies. How do you manage? How do you deal with email, for example? If you use, for example, Teams, Microsoft Teams and you have your chat going on in Teams, how do you manage all the different threads of the chat? Because the conversation in that chat is maybe records of business. You need to keep that as well. Training and audits, obviously, for continuous improvement. And then here, the last two is you will definitely need technology, because this is the only way you'll be able to manage the explosion of information. And we have to understand that this EDRMS is only a tool. It does not run itself. So you need the people, and you need also the solution partner that will help you move you forward in developing your records information management program and the implementation of the tool so that you increase the success rate of the implementation. So next, we're going to share with you how Ricoh can help you in your digital transformation and getting you records management ready. I'll turn it over to Ryan.
Thank you, Duke. Yeah, Ricoh has put a lot of effort into developing enterprise content management and workflow solutions for the marketplace today. It's more important than it has ever been to get employees access to information as quickly as possible. And our solutions have been designed to do exactly this. We have a variety of solutions, both on-site, off-site services, cloud-based solutions. We've really put together a toolkit that can enable our customers to really empower their digitization journey. We've focused our toolkit around advanced capture, enterprise document management tools, electronic forms, and web-based content management tools. We've also partnered with one of the solution providers that we use today, which is Laserfiche, to come to market with a product specifically for municipalities. This package has been designed to get our municipalities into a product that typically has a six-figure price tag at a fraction of the cost. It allows us to have a portal. It allows us to make this information secure, and it allows us to give municipalities the ability to take what Duke has just shared with you today and really turn that into reality by using this technology to implement in your municipality today. Our Quick Start package offers access to 100 full users within the municipality, gives you 10 terabytes of storage, unlimited public portal and public forms access, so you can do things like creating public forms for people within the municipality to interact with and submit things with. Gives you the ability to have advanced audit trails, so to track who's accessing what, when they're accessing it, when forms are being submitted, where they are in a workflow queue. Unlimited direct share and a DocuSign e-signature integration is available. Why you would partner with someone like Ricoh is we've been doing this for well over 20 years. We have processing centers across the country to offer processing of documents that need to be processed off-site. We have an experienced team of not only business consultants like Duke's team today. We also have teams that know how to implement this. So we have a team that literally manages this from end to end. So from the consulting phase to the design phase to the UAT phase to the moving this into production phase, you have one vendor to manage that entire process. We have deep expertise across multiple different verticals. We bring best-in-class knowledge to the processes you're trying to automate. We're flexible. Our solutions are scalable. And we have, in terms of end-to-end services clients, we have actually over 600 clients today in the Canadian marketplace. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to you, Rob.
Thank you, Ryan, and thanks to Duke for running the workshop. We are now open to Q&A with Duke and Solutions Consultant Michael Dick, who can answer any questions related to records management practices or the Ricoh Municipality Quick Start program, respectively. If you haven't already, a reminder to type in your questions in the chat box located in the bottom lower left corner of your screen. We'll give everyone a moment to pick away at their keyboard. So we do have a few questions that did come in along the way for you, Duke. So you may want to unmute. How have other municipalities dealt with end user buy-in in adopting EDRMS? And I gather we can safely assume this can be anywhere in Canada, like you see where you are, not just Alberta.
Right. Yeah. Well, it depends on what stage they're in. In a lot of instances, a lot of our customers don't really have to convince their users that they're adopting an EDRMS because they have common issues when they're managing their files and their records. Primarily, it's really about, they're having difficulty finding records. They're having difficulty of identifying what records are the true record or what are the duplicates, and so on and so forth, right? So the important piece here is really the communication. So we need to communicate to the end user community the reasons why you want to move forward with an EDRMS. And in one of my customers, one of the things that early on in when they were actually started talking about it was the corporate officer actually sent out a message saying that, we are not doing this for ourselves. We are doing this for the people who come after us. So that really sent a very strong message to the different end users. So it depends really on where they're at, where you're at in the program. It's so much really more about convincing the user community that this is how we are going to organize our files. Because what I've seen as well is that when we say that let's use the subject matter headings of the records classification as the way we are going to create our folder structure and our folder names, that's where you get resistance because users are not used to that, right? We have our own way, our minds work differently, and we have our own way of organizing our files in our hard drives. But you need to have a standard because it's very, I don't really, I don't think like other people. So if I'm trying to look for somebody's file in his shared drive, I don't think like him. So I can't really find it the way he would easily find it. So the middle ground there is a standard, and the standard we want to use is the records classification for the grouping.
Okay, thank you. We have another question for you, Duke, in the backlog. Do we need to create our own records classification and retention schedule?
That's a very good question. Like what I shown here is that you don't really need to reinvent the wheel. Somebody has already done it. Like in Alberta, there are a few. I wouldn't say a few. There are municipalities that have already have their own records classification. So they went through the process of creating one. So you can actually reach out to them and see if they can share that with you, right? It's something that somebody has already done, and we can just adopt it as well. What's important is that it needs to get formally adopted by the organization before you can actually start using it. Because when it comes to records management, it's all about compliance. It's all about proving chain of custody. It's all about proving that you follow the standard. So when you have your records in its digital format and you need to go to court and produce these records, that's where they're going to ask about the authenticity of the records, right? So why is it there? Or if you deleted the record already, why did you delete the record and stuff like that, right? They'll all point back to your records information management program. So if somebody has already created it, like the other example I did presented was what the First Nations did, right? So they looked at LGMA and then they worked with it and just adopted it for their use. So you can do the same thing. You can look at TOMREMS, you can look at LGMA, you can look at what other municipalities have done in Alberta, and then you can adopt what they've done already.
Okay, thanks. And this goes back to something, this is probably a good Ricoh-centric question. We have a lot of old paper records. How do we know what to scan and what not to?
That's another very good question, because again, it goes back to the cleanup process, right? So we have customers, what they've done is, because it's tons and tons of information, right? So what they said is, okay, let's just scan everything. So they went through the whole process of scan. They actually even contracted Ricoh to do the scanning for them. So every month we would receive a number of boxes and we would scan it. And we would attach metadata to it based on what we have agreed upon with the customer. And they set that aside in the repository. And what they did was, it may not be classified. We don't really have to classify those scanned documents, right? So if it's bulk scanning, you don't really have to classify that one. But what they do is they implemented a process called, they call it, if you touch it, you classify it. So that's what they've done. So if the user community goes into the scanned documents and they're looking for something and they find what they're looking for, they need now to take that information and then bring it into the records, into the EDRMS, right? Or into the repository. So again, it depends on your information governance strategy. You want to scan it. Our other customers, like their financial records, anything that's over 7 years, they discard, right? Because that's the CRA guidelines. Anything over 7 years, you can discard. So it depends on your what your strategy is, right, with your information governance.
Okay. Thank you. And we have, there's a follow-up on the second question, which is, our records classification retention schedule is or are incomplete. Do we need to complete it first before we can implement an EDRMS?
Yes, good question. I get that a lot. Ideally, yes, but in the strictest sense, you don't really have to. It doesn't have to be complete. You need something that you can work with, right? So what my other customers have done is that they've started the process, because if you remember the slides, it's the grouping of files, right? So as long as you reach a point wherein you can group your files. What they've done is they pick certain departments as the pilot, like they start in finance, for example, or HR department, and they say, okay, let's digitize their records, right? And they start with that, and then they may not have a complete classification, but for as long as they have something for finance and for HR, it's a beginning, right? So they can start it. Because if you wait, it may take a long time, and you probably not get started right away. And the thing here is that the idea here is you just need to get started.
Okay. We have a question for Mike. Which Alberta municipalities have adopted this program, and is this something you can share?
Yeah, thanks, Robert. So this is a very new kind of program that Laserfiche and Ricoh have put out. From a records management perspective, we've got a couple of universities, a couple of municipalities that have initially signed up for the service, and they are they're looking at every municipality is kind of different on that whole records management journey, and so they're not ready on the records management side, but they're ready to move forward with some stuff with forms, with some electronic forms that are available out to the public. So they're going to start there, and then they're going to circle back and look at their records as kind of the next phase. Okay.
And we have a last question, or at least there's one remaining. And I'll throw this open to either of you. what's a prime example of a forms application and how its digitized life cycle can benefit a municipality?
So I can, well, I'll answer the first part, and then Duke, if you have anything to add, you can definitely add it. One of the places from a forms perspective where we see a lot of traction is kind of around that whole workflow process, whether it's a residential workflow or a permitting workflow. Using Laserfiche forms, you can take that kind of traditional paper-based process and turn it into an electronic process that you can move throughout the municipality. So, from if you're looking at it from a residential perspective, you fill out the form. You're building a garage. You fill out the form, put in all the details required by the by the city or the town, and then once I submit that, then it goes through that whole workflow process. And the nice thing is that we've captured all the information. It's all searchable and ready to go. But then you can potentially take it to the next level, because when trades come out or when there are when people have to come and do the inspections on the work, they've got potentially have access to to the application, to the documentation, kind of at their fingertips, whether it's on a tablet or on a mobile device.
Right. So
the other.
Okay, sorry.
Oh no, I was just going to say, that's one use case, but there are, really anything that you've got in your organization with respects to, something that you're filling out today or something that you have as some sort of a fillable PDF, we can transition that into an electronic form and start, moving it electronically throughout the municipality.
Yes, yeah. One example was the dog licensing application. So we had that in one of the regional districts. What they did was the problem was the citizenry, they had to go to the office, a municipal office, to apply for the dog license. So what they did was they used Laserfiche forms for the application. So you just go online to the portal, to the website, fill in the form. And what we've done as well is that we've attached a payment gateway, so they pay for the dog license there then, and then the district just basically mails them the license after. So so that was a good example of using forms to help improve the customer experience.
Okay, there is a late question. I'm just trying to get some clarification, but it is. I'll read it out word for word. But it's it's related to freedom of information and privacy in practice. FOIP and PIPEDA. How are they relevant with Laserfiche forms? It sounds like Laserfiche forms do not conform to FOIP and PIPEDA acts.
Well, the form itself is a vehicle for requesting, like for example, if it's a FOIPA request. But Laserfiche itself, as a records as an EDRMS, actually is compliant with the with the specifications of the Department of U.S. military specifications for a records management system, so it's compliant with that. So in terms of the storing of the and securing of the record, it's secured, it's compliant. It's also compliant with the VERS, right? So that
there was some clarification. Sorry, the attendee added with the sharing. I think it's related to the sharing of information within departments specifically.
Oh, okay, sharing. Right. So before we configure Laserfiche, we actually sit down with different departments depending on how customers want to implement it. But typically, what happens is that we first have a planning workshop with the city or the municipality, again, to define what their information governance program is going to look like, how they envision they're going to be using the tool. We're going to explain to them how they can use the tool. And then from there, we move on to the different departments and define who has access and who has not access, who needs access to what, because that will define the security. So, for example, if, let's say HR, for example, HR employee files, typically what happens is that only the HR department has access to that employee file. So in the diagrams I was showing about that showed the folder structure, the regular user community will not even see the HR folder. It will not even appear in their screen. It's only HR, they'll see the folder of HR in their screen because that's the way it's going to be set up, right? Now, even within the HR department, there could be several levels of security. An example would be for salaries, for example, only the manager or the HR manager or higher can see the HR documents of the executive management team. So the regular HR employee will not be able to see the records of the EMT team. So things like that. So all of that will be discussed and defined as we when we do the discovery, when we sit down with the municipality and the end users, the stakeholders, so we can define how the Laserfiche security is going to look like, folder security is going to look like.
Okay, great. Thank you. And that pretty much puts us at time, or at least allowable time. We're right up near the hour. So I will close things off, and I'll thank you to everyone for attending. Please watch your inbox for an email with the recording coming in the next few business days. In the meantime, you can look out for one of our Alberta team members shown on screen who will be in contact probably over the next week. But feel free to call or email them for more information on the Municipality Quick Start package and to all the things that Duke was talking to previously as well. Also, please take a few minutes to complete the survey that will pop up once we end this session in a minute. Your feedback is very important to us to continually address any challenges you're facing. So I will just say bid you adieu and stay safe and have a great rest of your day.